President of Moldova was in Ottawa today to speak with the Prime Minister about Russia's threat to her country.
We are struggling to stay part of the free world, and we need the support of all the democratic countries.
As war rages in Ukraine, Moscow has been accused of plotting a violent coup in neighboring Moldova. Moldova sits at the doorstep of the war, sharing a border with Ukraine. It is currently a candidate to join the European Union. But what threat does Russia continue to pose to the nation? Maia Sandu is the president of Moldova. President Sandu, it's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I want to talk about the situation with Ukraine. Your country is right next door. And here, when we talk about that fight, we talk about how Ukraine is defending democracy and protecting freedoms. And that is literally true in the case of Moldova. What do you think would be happening in your country if Ukraine had been unable to hold out as long as it has?
Ukraine is helping us stay safe. And if Ukraine would have not been able to resist the attacks of Russia, then Russia would probably be in Moldova today.
Do you think they would have just rolled right in there, turned their forces on your country immediately?
This is what they've been saying. This is what they've been showing, that they want to recreate the Soviet Union. They don't have respect. Russia doesn't have respect for the territorial integrity, for the sovereignty of other countries. And yes, today we're safe in Moldova, thanks to the courage of the Ukrainian people.
You said in February that you accused Moscow of plotting an overthrow of your government. What more can you tell us about that plot, and do you think the risk has passed?
Russia wants to destabilize my country. Russia wants to have a pro-Russian government in Moldova, and it has been using all kinds of methods and has been waging a hybrid war against my country. It has been blackmailing Moldova using the energy resources. Now we have managed to diversify the sources of supply of energy, so they can't use gas anymore. Now they're paying some corrupt groups to organize protests, to provoke violence in the streets, hoping to overthrow the government. But we have managed to prove that we are strong. We're also strong because we have many friends, and my visit here today is a sign of the friendship with Canada and with many other democratic countries that we value very much.
You're a pro-Europe politician, pro-European Union, and you have a reputation as a reformer inside your country. Do you think that's why Russia is targeting Moldova, the way it has? Is it because of you specifically, or they want to get former Soviet states to come back under the Russian influence?
Russia would want to use Moldova against Ukraine. And that's why it needs in-power politicians who are corrupt, who can be bought. And unfortunately, we had situations like that in the past. But the Moldovans believe in democracy, we value democracy, we want to stay part of the free world. We did receive the candidate status for the EU membership, and the EU membership is our chance to survive as a democracy, to consolidate the democracy.
How challenging is it with the conflict happening next door in Ukraine, with the Russian secessionist part of the population, Transnistria, inside Moldova? How much of a challenge is that for you as a leader with the conflict right next door to balance all of that?
Of course, nothing compares to the situation that Ukraine goes through, and we are trying to help Ukraine as much as possible. We've been helping with the Ukrainian refugees. Today, the Ukrainian refugees account for about 4% of our population. We're helping with the solidarity lanes, and we'll do everything we can. And we're grateful to Canada for helping Ukraine, and we ask you to please continue to help Ukraine. Of course, Moldova is affected economically. We had an inflation rate of 35% last year. Now it went down to 18%, but still it is pretty tough. We had an increase in the tariff for gas, which was 7 times in less than 12 months. We had a GDP decline of 6%, so you can imagine that the situation is not easy. Of course, we're trying to do our best to help people, but the economic implications are significant. At the same time, we are becoming more resilient, we're becoming stronger, we're improving the business environment, we're providing opportunities for the investors, and we're sure that we're certain that we will succeed.
You've just had a meeting with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. What can you tell us about that conversation? I wonder what kind of support you're seeking from Canada and other Western nations in this conflict with Russia.
I'm grateful to the support we received to manage the refugee crisis when we were receiving many people and we needed immediate support, and Canada provided help through the UN organizations. We continue to provide support to the refugees. So it would be helpful to have this continuous support. I've talked to the Prime Minister about our efforts to reform the country. Fighting corruption and reforming justice is a very important issue on our agenda, and I made a request to the government to help us by imposing sanctions against those who try to destabilize the Republic of Moldova and against those who were involved in corruption cases. Like the EU has recently adopted such a sanctioning mechanism for those against those who are trying to destabilize the country. It would be useful if Canada would do the same.
Would that be sanctions against people outside of Moldova or even inside Moldova itself?
Both. Some people left the country. Some people are still in the country using Russian money and trying to destabilize the country.
Right, because this is critical for your agenda to get full membership with the European Union, to
Indeed.
show the reforms in the justice system.
And to strengthen the state. We want to have strong state institutions, and there's people using the dirty money trying to undermine the reforms and trying to undermine our institutions.
I wonder, I mean, we watch Ukraine from here. There's a big Ukrainian population in this country, but there's an ocean and most of a continent between us and the conflict. You don't have that luxury. What is your, from right next door, what is your sense of how that fight for Ukraine is going right now?
Well, Ukrainians are very courageous, as I said. And we do believe that they will recover their territories. And they've been fighting very hard for the independence of their country, for freedom, for the values that we all share. But Ukraine needs to be supported. It needs all the support from the democratic world now.
Your country, as I understand it in your constitution, is the official position of neutrality, right? So you're not a NATO member, even though you work with a lot of NATO states through Europe. Does that become how difficult is it to maintain a position like that in a time like this, right? When Russia, you're right there at the cusp between this polarization between autocracy and democracy. How much of a challenge is that for you as a leader?
Before the war started, before Russia started this aggression against Ukraine, there was not much discussion about the neutrality in the constitution because people could not imagine that a war could start on the continent. Now, of course, there is a lot of discussion, and there is not a majority in the country which would support the NATO membership. There are many people who are discussing and are wondering whether the neutrality is going to protect us. Because if Russia does not respect our constitution, then the neutrality doesn't mean much. And we see that Russia doesn't respect the territorial integrity of its neighbors, so why would it respect the provision of the neutrality in Moldova's constitution? But the Russian propaganda has been so strong over the last decades, blaming NATO for many things. And today, the Russian propaganda says that the moment Moldova starts talking about NATO membership, then it risks being attacked by Russia. So the fears, the propaganda, still determine some people, to not to support the membership. But there has been an increase in the number of those who believe that Moldova should become part of NATO.
Right, because the NATO aspirations of Ukraine has been used as part of the pretense for that invasion. But you mentioned Russian disinformation. It's a global challenge, but I suspect it's even more profound for the country with a makeup like yours. How do you push back against that as president? Well,
we're still learning how to become efficient, but yes, we are on the front line when it comes to experiencing the Russian propaganda and disinformation. We have been changing legislation, especially after the war has started, to put some filters to make sure that the Moldovans are not exposed to this propaganda. But then there is the internet, the social networks, and it's pretty challenging. Now we are going to promote a special law on that and create a special unit, and we're going to learn from other countries like the Baltic countries on how to more efficiently deal with the issue of propaganda.
President Maia Sandu, it's nice to meet you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for the invitation.